Well, I bet you didn't think I was going to come on today, did you? I'm going to take the phone off the hook. Uh, just got back from an unusual Thursday parking lot day, uh, but I hope you're still tuning in or watch this show in rerun. Um, the other day, I learned of the passing of Kenneth Anger, the filmmaker. I'm sure many of you are probably too young to know very much about Kenneth Anger and his impact on the the art of filmmaking. He was spoken of very highly by uh, Martin Scorsese and other luminaries. He was an underground filmmaker and a groundbreaking avant-garde filmmaker. And Constance and I and the DuQuette family actually had the great pleasure of hosting him at our house, and he was our house guest for a few days. And he was very interested in Aleister Crowley and the magic of Thelema, and he was a prominent member of the OTO, and I had the honor of initiating him into, or officiating at his initiations in Hastings, England, a number of years ago. It was a marathon initiation weekend with multiple degrees and things like that, and that was my great privilege to do that, along with aided by other European OTO officers. And he witnessed a mass that Constance and I celebrated at our temple. Actually, we had a Gnostic mass, a dedicated Gnostic mass temple, a standalone building, an octagonal, gorgeous building built particularly for that event. And it was sort of the inaugural mass of that facilities, and it was attended by Sabazius and Kenneth Anger, and he was very impressed at the unusual beautifulness of our octagonal temple, that he wanted to shoot Constance and I doing mass, and in order to do close-ups of things. And so we did one afternoon. He came down with a one-man film crew, and we dressed up and did our celebrated a mass in multiple scenes and sections and things, because it had always been his dream to do a movie that's sort of based on the Gnostic Mass. Now, we weren't going to, I don't think it was ever intended that Constance and I would be those actors. He had certain actors in mind to do it, but he just wanted to see the blocking and things like that. But anyway, and he was a very close friend, or after he stayed with us, he was just such a wonderful guest and a generous person, and he would send our son Jean-Paul different kinds of stuffed dinosaurs and stuff, because our son was very young at the time, and they both enjoyed dinosaurs. So we've got stuffed animals and posters and things that Kenneth sent us over the years. Anyway, what I want to do today, and this may be a bit longer than most of our morning meetings, because I want to get through the whole thing. In my book, Low Magic, it's all in your head. You just have no idea how big your head is. And I'm not sure when this book came out with Llewellyn here. I guess 2013, I think, was the first edition of this. And there's a chapter called A Midsummer Night's Curse. Now, out of courtesy to everyone involved, I tell this story of events that transpired at Haruraha Lodge in Newport Beach in, I believe it was 1981. And so I refer to these people not by their names. Literally, the names were changed to protect the innocent, or protect just the privacy of each individual. Now, the two individuals particularly involved here have both passed away. One of them 5 or 6 years ago, and Kenneth has just passed away back on the 11th or the 14th of this month. But anyway, I would like to share that story with you, and for the first time make clear who it is I'm talking to, and how I at first amended the story so that I could tell the magical aspects of the events without disturbing anybody's privacy. So it's called A Midsummer Night's Curse, and it is chapter 7 of Low Magic, published by Llewellyn. If you don't have a Low Magic, you don't know what you're missing. It's one of my favorite books, but I say it about all of them, but it is one of my favorite books. A Midsummer Night's Curse. Epigram is from Shakespeare. Oh, what fools these mortals be. Curses. Now, there's a subject for a discussion of low magic. Do curses work? Have you ever been cursed? I mean really cursed. Cursed by someone who believes they know what they're doing and makes no secret of the fact that they've put a curse on you. Someone who stands ready to delight in news of your misery and adversities and hungrily takes upon themselves karmic responsibility for your every misfortune. Even if you do not believe in the power of curses, it's very unsettling to think that someone out there fears or despises you so much they profess to willfully project a current of malice toward you in a poisonous ray of concentrated hate. That's why, in a way, it doesn't matter whether you're a believer in curses or not. If someone has cursed you and you learn about it and you feel uncomfortable about it, then the curse is at least already partially working. How would you handle something like that? How would you go about neutralizing a curse without being dragged deeper into the mad, toxic world of the curser? This is a story of a misunderstanding, a curse, and an improvised magical ritual designed to neutralize the curse. The misunderstanding was between two very dear friends of our family. both of whom were, I can now say were, practicing magicians. One, a prominent filmmaker, and in the book I say a foreign filmmaker, just sort of to distract, to make a generic thing out of it. But technically, one is a prominent filmmaker. I'll call him FF. Well, that's Kenneth Anger. And the other, at the time, a struggling artist and writer, whom I'll call SA. And that was David Paul Wilson, who later in his magical career wrote and published under the name S. Jason Black. Okay, so we're talking about a younger Kenneth Anger and a younger S. Jason Black here. At the time I wrote this, David was still living. David had passed away, and Kenneth was still alive. To respect the privacy and the memories of both living and dead, I'll not reveal their identities other than to say it's likely that both their names would be recognizable to at least a few of you who are reading these words. David was a huge fan of Anger's, and in the autumn of 1981, he convinced me and several other adventurous lodge brothers to travel, believe it or not, to Sacramento to attend a film festival and a thing called an infrasion. Robert Anton Wilson spoke there, and Grady McMurtry of the OTO spoke there. Kenneth Anger spoke, and we all stayed at one of the hosts' beautiful house, and that's where we met. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. To attend a film festival where Anger was to speak and exhibit several of his films. As a matter of fact, it was the world premiere of Lucifer Rising. After the event, David and I had the opportunity to have drinks with Kenneth and talked at some length. All three of us were students of magic in general and the magic of Aleister Crowley in particular. So we hit it off like kindred souls. Before we parted, I gave Kenneth my phone number and encouraged him to call me next time he was down in Los Angeles area, adding that he was more than welcome to stay with the DuQuettes while he was in the neighborhood. I never dreamed he would take me up on the offer. About a week later, it might have been a bit more than a week. It was, I believe it was November 25th or 26th of 1981. I received a call from Kenneth who said he was staying with a friend in San Diego and told me that in 2 days he was scheduled to visit Catalina Island. But if my offer of hospitality was still open, he'd be happy to come stay with us until then. He even offered to bring a copy of his newest film, Lucifer Rising, and screen it if I could find a projector, and I did, okay, screen it at our home for our lodge members. It was an outrageously kind and thoughtful offer, and I immediately accepted. Naturally, David was beside S. Jason Black, David Wilson. David was beside himself with excitement, and he was one of the first to arrive on movie night. Another of our lodge members, and that was Dr. Rick Potter. Another of our lodge members went to Rick and I evoked a demon together. That was in the chapter, never conjure a fiend with a friend. So these characters you may recognize from other of my adventures. Anyway, another of our lodge members went to the mall, South Coast Plaza, and purchased every copy of Anger's books that the store had in stock. And the book was beautiful editions, hardbound editions of Hollywood Babylon. It cost Rick a fortune, but he bought them all. After an exciting night viewing the film, everybody went home with an autographed copy. It was truly a very memorable event. David stayed late chatting with Kenneth, and before heading home, he offered to chauffeur him to the Catalina ferry the next afternoon, and Kenneth accepted. Now, I believe that was the afternoon of November 28th, 1981. I know that because while Kenneth was in Catalina, Natalie Wood died in Catalina. She drowned in the bay. And we later found out that Kenneth was eating dinner at probably the only really good restaurant in Avalon, and sitting at the next table was Robert Wagner, Natalie Wood, and Christopher Walken. And then they later went to the boat, and Natalie fell over and drowned. But it's so Hollywood Babylon for Kenneth to actually be there at the time. It was just so spooky and but anyway, I digress. Okay. We were all in bliss over this brief but pleasant brush with celebrity. And I'm happy to say that Kenneth continues to this day to be a dear friend to the DuQuette family. Okay. Sadly, his friendship with David would not so long endure. I feel the need to pause and remind the reader that artists of great genius often possess highly mercurial temperaments. They can be high-strung, unpredictable, and moody. Also, at times, the creative energy bubbling inside them cannot be contained within the narrow confines of their artistic medium. Occasionally, it just bursts out upon the world, sometimes visiting chaotic and devastating effects upon unsuspecting people around them. A couple days after dropping Kenneth off at the ferry, David received in the mail an elegantly adorned, it was gorgeous too, elegantly adorned letter from Kenneth. He excitedly opened it, expecting to find a thank you note or some other such pleasantry Kenneth is known for. And he just sends thank you letters and a wonderful, sweet, courteous guy. But instead, David was stunned to find an eloquently composed poem, penned in fine calligraphy, casting a hideous curse upon him, upon David. The reason? It seems that when Kenneth arrived at the hotel in Catalina and unpacked his bags, he discovered that a medicine bottle that should have contained doctor-prescribed tablets important to his health and peace of mind had been emptied of its contents and refilled with ordinary aspirin. Understandably upset, yet completely ignoring the possibility of any other explanation, Kenneth became convinced that our dear David Wilson was the culprit, and that such larceny must be answered with a magical curse. It's so dramatic. And in retrospect, it's just it's a delicious story. Okay. Naturally, we were all very shocked and confused by the news. As his host, I felt particularly responsible for anything that might have taken place in my home under my watch. I immediately sent Kenneth a check to cover what I estimated would be the cost of refilling his prescription, along with a note affirming my conviction that David would be the last person on earth who would tamper with his luggage or have any interest in that particular medication, and that I was sure that there must be some other explanation. Kenneth accepted the check and graciously assured me that he did not in any way blame me. However, he held firm in his belief that David was the culprit, and that was that. I got to add here, if Leroy Lauer is watching today, I believe, because Constance and I have always been just broke as church mice. As a matter of fact, church mice is pretty much the kind of broke we always are. Leroy provided that check. So Leroy, thank you. Thank you. Giving credit where credit is due here. Okay, David, of course, was heartbroken. Later, his sadness turned to anger at being accused of such a thing, especially by someone he idolized and only wished would think well of him. In the days that followed, he fell into a dark depression. Even though he had done nothing wrong, his resentment and frustration had the effect of the curse actually working on him. He performed the standard banishing rituals and took the usual steps recommended for psychic self-defense, but nothing lifted his spirits. I eventually suggested we try something altogether different to neutralize the curse and help our brother snap out of it. It was my firm belief that this whole matter could be blamed upon a, quote, demon, unquote. Not a demon from the Goetia or the Book of Abramelin, but a spirit of misunderstanding. Kenneth was simply not seeing clearly, as if his eyes, in a metaphoric sense, had been bewitched. The magical solution became obvious when I took another look at the stationery upon which the curse had been written. But before going into that, and so the details of our little curse-breaking ceremony might make a little more sense to you, I need to share a little bit more information about the extraordinary life and magical world of Kenneth Anger, whose connection to the film industry goes back to the early days of sound pictures. In fact, as a young man, actually as a child, he appeared in the cast of Max Reinhardt's 1935 masterpiece, A Midsummer Night's Dream, the first sound movie of a Shakespeare play ever produced. Now, that has always been the understanding, that Kenneth played the changeling child. And he's in a turban and dressed up in a little Indian thing. And the kid looks just like Kenneth Anger. And I do not doubt that it was Kenneth Anger. But other people that have dug into it say that that character at least was credited with under another name. In any event, at the very least, Kenneth's mother was worked in the, I believe, the wardrobe department on that film, and Kenneth was on the set with her. He was too young to be left alone, and he was on that set of the most magical movie made to date, really. And it's conceivable at the very least that in whatever the term is for the people that stand in for the characters as they're setting the lights and they're preparing things, at the very least, Kenneth took had that little job. So I just had to digress there for a second. I personally believe that the person I'm looking at in the movie itself is young Kenneth Anger. But anyway, his participation in that classic production ignited his brilliant imagination and engendered in his young heart a passionate love and fascination both for the art of cinema and the themes of magic. The world of A Midsummer Night's Dream became an abiding magical reality for him. He would throughout his life personally identify with its magic. Even the curse he cast upon David, poor David, was written on personalized stationery that was festooned with beautiful and whimsical images of the fairies from Midsummer Night's Dream. The largest image on the parchment sheet was that of Puck, the mischievous aide to Oberon, the king of the fairies. Now, I saw certain haunting parallels between the plot of the play and the events surrounding the misunderstanding that led to the curse. In the play, Oberon wishes to play a trick on Titania, his fairy queen. While she sleeps, he squeezes the juice of a certain plant in her eyes, bewitching her to fall in love with the first creature she gazes on when she awakes. When she does wake up, she casts her eyes upon the character Bottom, one of the clowns of the play, whose head, because of other magical shenanigans, has been magically replaced by that of a donkey. She immediately falls helplessly in love with the monster, which leads to all manner of fun. Confusing matters even further, Puck applies the magic flower juice to the eyes of other characters in the play while they sleep, and they too wake to mistakenly see things incorrectly. Things become hilariously chaotic as misunderstanding piles upon misunderstanding until finally Oberon and Puck apply the antidote. Excuse me, not the antidote, the antidote, the juice of another kind of plant, to the eyes of the bewitched characters, and everything is set right in the end. Everyone in our family circle of friends during those years was very familiar with this delightful play because each summer for several years straight, the DuQuettes hosted a backyard A Midsummer Night's Dream party. We would meet early in the evening, divvy up roles, hand out scripts and flashlights, and then in the company of dear friends and underneath a bright moon and summer stars, we'd sip wine and read through the entire play. In an ironically adverse way, the similarities between the play and Kenneth's curse were unmistakable. Something, some force or circumstances or delusion or bias had bewitched Kenneth's eyes so that when he discovered his property missing, he blamed the first person that came to mind, the last person he saw before stepping onto the Catalina ferry. David. If only we could apply Oberon's antidote to Kenneth's eyes. We certainly couldn't do it physically, but perhaps there is a way we could do it magically. And so the play itself became the blueprint of a ritual to lift the curse. Now, Shakespeare was well aware of the mythological and magical properties of plants and herbs. He mentions by name at least 80 varieties in his plays and poems, 26 in Midsummer Night's Dream alone. I wanted to first confirm exactly what flower was used by Oberon to bewitch the eyes of Titania and the others, and then what other flower was used to lift the curse and allow everyone to see things clearly again. In Act 2, Scene 1, Oberon himself tells us about the first flower when he informs his servant, Puck, precisely what it is and why it is magical, and where he can find it. Oberon. My gentle Puck, come hither. Thou rememberest, since I once sat upon a promontory, and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the sea maid's music. Puck says, I remember. That very time I saw, but thou couldst not, flying between the cold moon and the earth, Cupid, all armed. A certain aim he took at a fair vestal thrown by the west, and loosed his love shaft smartly from his bow, as it should pierce 100,000 hearts. But I might see young Cupid's fiery shaft quenched in the chaste beams of the watery moon, and the imperial votress passed on in maiden meditation, fancy free. Yet I marked where the bolt of Cupid fell. It fell upon a little western flower, before milk white, now purple with love's wound, and maidens call it love in idleness. Fetch me that flower, the herb I showed thee once. The juice of it on sleeping eyelids laid will make man or woman madly dote upon the next live creature it sees. Fetch me this herb, and be thou here again ere the Leviathan can swim a league. I love this shit. In Shakespeare's day, love and idleness was the name of a violet and white European wildflower, also called heart's-ease, Viola tricolor, which was the ancient ancestor of the pansy. His description of the mythical genesis of the flower that, being created by Cupid's arrow, missed the heart of a, quote, fair vestal thrown by the west, was a not-so-subtle reference to Queen Elizabeth I, whose virgin heart was officially never pierced by Cupid's arrow. The purple of love's wound of once pure white flower was a poignant reference that the fact that Elizabeth had shunned the personal pleasures of marriage and the garment that would have been her white bridal dress was transformed by greater duty to the royal purple of the monarchy. She quite literally became the bride of England. When you think about it, there was big magic in that flower. The sexual power of Cupid's arrow shot, quote, as it should pierce 100,000 hearts. Instead of casting a powerful spell of passion on the great queen, injected all its magic into that tiny quivering flower. Wow. The identity of the other flower, the one Oberon used to free Titania and the others from the spell of misunderstanding, can be found in Act 4, Scene 1. Oberon. But first I will release the fairy queen. And he goes over the flower, puts it over her sleeping eyes. Be as thou wast wont to be. And then he shakes the flower on her eyes. See as thou wast wont to see. Dian's bud or Cupid's flower has such force and blessed power. Now, my Titania, wake you, my sweet queen. Dian's bud, Artemisia absintheum, is the name for the chaste goddess of the hunt, another virgin. Its archaic name for absinthe or wormwood, associated with sorcery from prehistoric times. Its feathery greenish-gray leaves are poisonous in concentrated doses and produces a narcotic effect in small doses. This was starting to sound like pharmacology. Okay, the basic format of our ritual was to be very simple. After due preparation, we would have David smear certain parts of the curse parchment with the juice of a love and idleness plant. These parts would include Kenneth's signature, the image of the mischievous Puck, and particular words and phrases that most demonstrated Kenneth's temporary inability to see things accurately. Then, once the curse itself was anointed and fully alive with the delusional spirit of misunderstanding, David would neutralize the spirit by liberally smearing the juice of Dian's bud upon the same areas of the parchment. All of this would, of course, be accompanied by appropriate incantations gleaned from the works of Shakespeare. The whole operation promised not only to be magically viable, but also a lot of fun. We chose for our magical temple one of the most beautiful places on earth, the Huntington Library and Botanical Gardens in San Marino, California. Nestled within its 140 acres is a charming Shakespeare garden containing many of the herbs. I think it contains all of the herbs and plants mentioned in Shakespeare's works, all with little plaques displaying the names of the plays in which they made their appearance. It would be no trouble at all to find our love and idleness in Dian's bud. But how we would pluck them up without drawing attention of the groundskeepers, there's the rub. It was a cool Sunday afternoon, and Constance and I and David and a handful of interested lodge members carpooled up to the Huntington. As expected, the place was crowded. The Shakespeare Garden, however, was nearly deserted, and it took us no time at all to locate and feloniously pluck up a pocketful of each of our flowers. Before leaving the Shakespeare Garden for more private environs on the grounds, we placed a small offering of some of our ill-gotten herbs at the stone bust of Shakespeare to invoke the presence and blessing of the immortal bard. After all, he would, in our play, be the deity. He would play the deity role in our little magical drama. The spirit of Ariel's greeting to the magician Prospero from The Tempest served as our invocation. So we placed our little offering at the bust of Shakespeare, and I said, "All hail, grave master. I come to answer thy best pleasure, be it to fly, to swim, to dive into the fire, to ride on the curled clouds." We then strolled down to the lily ponds, and found ourselves a quiet spot in the shade of a giant magnolia tree and set to work. We all sat on the ground and surrounded David to shield his magical operation from prying eyes. The ceremony was short and very simple. David crushed the love and idleness between his hands and rolled them back and forth until the plant was pulpy and wet. He then smeared the area of the curse I described above. Then he held the anointed paper in his hand while he read Oberon's original curse. The words didn't exactly match our situation, but we thought they'd do. What seest thou when thou dost wake? Do it for thy true love's sake. Love and languish for his sake, be it ounce or cat or bear or pard or boar with bristled hair. In thy eye that shall appear when thou wakest, it is thy dear. Wake when some vile thing is near. Then, doing the same with Diane's bud flower, he smeared the paper with the antidote, saying, Then crush this herb into Kenneth's eye, whose liquor hath this virtuous property, to take from hence all air with his might, and make his eyeballs roll with wonted sight. When next they wake, all this derision shall seem a dream and fruitless vision. Then that was that. I banished the temple with Puck's closing line. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended. That you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear. And this weak and idle theme no more yielding, but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend. And as I am an honest Puck, if we have unearned luck now to scape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long, ere the Puck a liar call. So good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends. We spent the rest of the afternoon enjoying the gardens and art museum. David said he felt much better. We debated whether or not to burn the curse letter. David would have none of it, insisting he'd like to keep it as a memento. We would later discover, now get this, we'd later discover that over the years, Kenneth made something of a habit of cursing people whom he thought had somehow wronged him, and that most of them took it in good humor. Some were even amused and flattered at the distinction. Did our Midsummer Night's Dream ritual work? Like all magic, I guess it's a matter of opinion. David certainly stopped worrying about the curse, and in the years to follow went on to become a successful illustrator and author. His untimely death 26 years later was not likely the result of any curses other than those his life choices sadly loosed upon himself. And Kenneth? We'd learned from a third party nearly 10 years later that his friend in San Diego, the one whom he had stayed with in the days just prior to his visit with us, had eventually confessed to the pill substitution, stating it was a foolish act of misguided concern for Kenneth's health and well-being. And so ends the story of A Midsummer Night's Curse. I hope it served as an illustration of how magic ceremonies can be drawn from virtually any source that inspires the magician, and that it isn't always necessary to lift a magical ritual directly from the works of John Dee or the Golden Dawn or Aleister Crowley or Gerald Gardner, in order to assure that Jack shall have Jill, naught shall go ill, the man shall have his mare again, and all shall be well. And that's my little ode to our dear friend, Kenneth Anger. I know that was a very, very long talk today. And thank you for waiting over an hour to join us. But until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself. Be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will.